I'd like to call to order the Village of Ashwaubenon Finance and Personnel Committee meeting for Tuesday, July 21st, 2026. Roll call, please.
Chairperson Zerbal.
Here.
President Kardasky. Here. Casey Telford.
Here.
Tom Selk.
Here.
Tim Jaden.
Here.
If you're able, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, and please keep in mind our men and women that are serving to help keep us safe here and abroad. Action on the agenda.
I move we approve.
Second. We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed, motion carries. Action on the minutes from June 16th, 2026 Finance and Personnel Committee meeting.
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye,
Aye.
opposed, motion carries. 6A, items for discussion. A, receive, accept the June 2026 financial reports.
Hello, everyone. Just really what these are, we try to provide these every month. We've got the investment report, which is our investment portfolio, which really hasn't changed. We put a set of money in there years ago, and Associated Trust manages those portfolios. There's more detail if you'd ever want to see it, but it's, you know, a lot of municipal bonds, like we do bonds, they're in there, so things are kind of coming and going all the time. So it's just a steady incline lately in the last 2 years, just kind of slowly going up and down, or slowly moving upwards. You have times where there's market corrections. You'll see things like unrealized gain loss, things like that. That's what that is. It's just more or less market corrections. But overall, that portfolio has performed very well for us over time. The other reports that I have are just the general fund and then our special revenue and capital project funds. Overall, what I'd say about the general fund is at this point, it's pretty early. You like to get through summer where you've got a lot of potential variances start to catch up. What you're looking at is a year-to-date June versus a full year budget. So it should be in line. We don't have anything that should really be significantly away from budget, other than, fuel prices may have been a little bit higher than normal, but sometimes that finds a way to correct itself over the year. I will say that our building permit revenue likely will be under budget just because it's kind of slowed down. Building out there is slowed down, but it is Ashwaubenon, and sometimes things just kind of happen on quickly, but overall I would expect that to be lower. But we'll have more interest income. I know that the interest rates are going to be higher, but again, we don't want to budget to a number that we're just going to have to potentially decrease. So we purposely budget under on that, and that allows us a little bit of cushion. So when something might be under that's unexpected, we've got some positive variance to cover over time. So overall, the general fund is doing well personnel-wise. Normal operating costs and supplies are fairly consistent. So I don't anticipate the end of the year to be any issues that we need to be concerned about.
How can I put it? How sure are we going to get state aid money? Is that pretty much cut and dried, or is that at the whim of the legislature?
Those numbers are all budgeted at the state level. So I've been here 20 years, and not once have we not received what they will tell us we're going to get. They give us an estimate, and it's usually spot on. Things like transportation aid will be exactly what they tell us. Shared aid, there's a couple, but they're minor. Like they're based off of other reports, but you're talking, it's a $12,000 revenue stream. It might be 12.5, it might be 12.2. But all the other ones, video service aid, it's right on. It's what they tell us it's going to be. So in the fall, during budget time between September and October, they provide us estimates for our next year budget, and those all are in their biannual budget, those numbers. So yeah, I'm not concerned at all about not getting those. It would have to be something significant, very, very significant statewide for those not to come through.
That's good.
Yeah.
Greg, you had mentioned Associated manages our funds, right?
Associated Trust Company, yes.
Trust company?
Yeah, not it's a different arm of Associated.
Right. How often do we look at
I think this was brought up a couple of years ago, but how often do we look at who manages and if there's somebody out there that would be, and I trust that you guys are happy with these guys, but how often does that happen that we look into that?
So when it's been probably, so that was established, those portfolios were established in 2012, so it would have been slightly before that when we had already been with Associated Trust, so we renewed with them. We did an RFP at the time. I have not done an RFP since. It gets a little tricky. I suppose you could maybe transfer the portfolios out, but I can't just go close them because then you'll take a loss. That would be bad. But certainly if that's something the committee wants to do, we did the banking services RFP last year.
That's what I was
May
thinking
of
of,
2025.
yeah.
That's for our banking operations where we make our deposits, our daily deposits, and we run, our AP checks through there that then go out to all the vendors, things like that. But the trust company on these portfolios is a completely different contract. So I have not looked at that in 15 years. So that would be probably the next thing to look at and do an RFP for. And certainly I can put that on the radar. Right now, I'm in the middle of a audit services RFP. So those will be due in August. And then we'll manage through that. So maybe in 2027, that'd be a good time to look at.
Okay. Yeah,
RFP.
like I said, I trust that you guys are comfortable where we're at, but 2012 is a long time, and I'm sure it's a difficult process. But 2012 was at 14 years, and at some point, it's probably, and it's probably time to at least have your finger on the pulse, which you might already. I would imagine you are already.
And to be fair, it's somewhat of a restricted, options. They can't just go nuts and, take the money out to Vegas and throw it on this and that and do some. We have a very, very conservative policy, which is kind of the same as what the state offers and most municipals have. It's safety, liquidity, and yield. Those are your priorities. So you're very limited in some regards of what you can do. I would imagine most companies that would have very similar portfolios than what we have today, but certainly we can do that. I have no problem. And they understand that. They would understand if we do an RP.
Yeah, I would just add to that you're typically going to find whatever investment company's going to manage that portfolio is going to invest in the same funds. Just similar to if you had a Roth IRA or an IRA, you have your certain funds that you're going to invest in, and it's not like day trading or individual stock trading. That's not what they do. They invest the funds into a particular fund account, and that produces value over time. If we're I'm not saying that I'm opposed to doing an RFP. It's certainly reasonable to do one, especially one that hasn't been looked at in the last 10 or 15 years. Your predominant cost savings or value is going to come in the administrative costs to administer that program more than it is on the return of the investments that the fund advisor is investing in on our behalf.
And I guess that's kind of where I was coming from. I understand the rest of it, but yeah, thanks for the information. Yeah. All right, any other questions on the report? No?
I just have a quick question on the cable TV franchise fee. Does TDS get involved with that because of all the cable they're driving or running through the village, or am I way off base with that?
I'm not exactly certain that TDS qualifies for the cable TV franchise fees that they pay into the state. I guess I would need to do a little bit of digging on that. Regardless of TDS's direct involvement in the costs or the revenues that are generated from that fee, we do know a lot of people are cutting the cable, so to speak, across the state, and that does impact the revenues that are created from that fund. And so I think you'll see our cable TV franchise fees going down over the period of the last 10 years. That's simply because there's just not as many customers purchasing cable with all the streaming services that are available today. So it's not unreasonable to think that cable TV franchise fee could become so nominal in the grand scheme of things that
I think
it's something that we need to be aware of, that's not a revenue source that can be relied upon over a long period of time.
All right, if there's nothing else, I'll take a motion to accept the report.
So moved.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second to accept the financial reports. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, motion carries. B, consider discuss act on revised position description for paralegal administrative analyst. Joel?
Thank you, Chris. It's kind of rare. Sometimes we come back to you. It's rare that we would come back to you after successfully fulfilling a position and then looking for some changes to the position. Usually it's we unsuccessfully fill a position and we got to make some adaptations or changes. But this is different. So after successfully filling the confidential executive assistant position this past fall, we quickly realized the incumbent in that position, who's Alicia, by the way, is very capable, has the skill set knowledge to do many more tasks and administrative analytical work for both the village manager's office, but also in support of the village attorney and for the human resources department. The incumbent comes with a background as a paralegal, certified, and with some other analytical work in prior experience. We just happened to get lucky that she wanted to come work for us, and so we're benefited from that. So since her start date this past fall, there have been a number of different tasks and responsibilities that have been assigned to Alicia, primarily because of the capability and the experience and knowledge that she brings to the position. And as a result of that, her position description has changed to reflect those job responsibilities. And so anytime a position description changed substantially, we review that position description and then ultimately work our way through committee and village board to make those adjustments and adaptations. In addition to the fact that we were able to hire an individual with that skill set, if you recall, last year we also changed how we structured the village attorney's office. We went from an in-house attorney to a contracted attorney. And because of those changes, we weren't quite certain how that relationship was going to work on several of the day-to-day functions of that office. And with Alicia here performing that paralegal work, it's provided a really seamless transition between the in-house attorney and the contracted attorney. In fact, Alicia's doing a lot of coordination and paralegal work associated with prosecution and enforcement that our in-house village attorney had done previously. So there's cost savings to the village as a result of those benefits of having Alicia on staff. So the position description that is in your packet tonight supports those changes and those added responsibilities that we are now assigning this position. It does establish a primary focus on paralegal and legal support services for the village attorney as well as the village manager. That legal support to me and to my office is directly tied to legislative type things like ordinance creation, policy creation, things of that nature. This group wouldn't necessarily be familiar with it as a whole, but the village board is aware. Like, we went through some ordinance updates on escorts, massage licenses, things of that nature. Much of that pre-work was done through Alicia in preparation of those ordinances and policy changes. Still retains executive administrative support responsibilities like setting up agendas, meeting coordination, records management, and confidential communications that occur both through the attorney, through the village manager, and the human resources department. Supports human resource administration, risk management, and claims processing, which delves into the legal aspect of risk management. And then also supports and incorporates some organizational research, policy review, performance measurement, some grant coordination and identifying grants and supporting different aspects of that, and then any special project work. One of the things that Alicia is going to be very proud to talk about here is the work she's done on the forms project. We have gone through and systematically, I shouldn't say we, Alicia has gone through and systematically updated every village form. And how many are there, Alicia? Thousands? Hundreds? A lot. She's done a lot. So the special project was, we need to update our forms, we need to modernize them. We had forms that never even asked for an email address or a cell phone number or just things of a modern society because they were so outdated. Just updating those forms, matching a brand profile, making sure that they work, function, and can be easily disseminated and used in a digital and online world. And so there's that. This position is going to provide some flexibility for other village-wide initiatives and organizational priorities. We're in the midst of updating our strategic plan, and so this position is going to support some of those. And then in addition to that, there was a note in there that this position will also support the clerk's office in the event that there's a vacancy. And that could be anything short-term, like a lunch break when a couple of people are on vacation, or a long-term vacancy in the event somebody is ill, maybe they're on family medical leave, and we need to backfill during those times of need. This updated position description does not create a new position. It does not necessarily make any adjustments to compensation associated with the revised classification. Regardless of the person in the position, we classify and compensate positions based on the responsibilities, the skills, qualifications, and background required for that. And following that classification, there aren't any changes to wage grade as assigned to the position. Ultimately, it's just a reflection of what this individual is performing and reflective of the skills, qualities, and abilities for that individual. Prior to the meeting, in conversation with Mary, we talked about, is this position being crafted to match the incumbent, or is it being matched to reflect the needs of the organization? And I can confidently say both. Certainly matches the qualifications of the person, and so they're capable of doing the job. But with the changes in the village attorney's office and some of the responsibilities and the goal that we always had to kind of have that more administrative analytical person, this really kind of meets and matches those needs as well. And I think we found our niche in this revised position description to support those operations. Be happy to answer any questions that you have.
So does the grade 6 compensation classification fit, I'll call it externally, competitively? So if we were looking for this skill set on the market again, would it match?
Yeah, Tim, I think you may recall, just to kind of give a brief history on this, if you recall, when we had a management analyst position previously, we tried to fill it, unsuccessfully filled it. Then we went back to the drawing board. We were originally going to create this paralegal position, very similar to what we have presented today. And we went through the process of actually getting approvals from committee and board to do that. And it was classified then as a grade 6. So I feel comfortable that this matches that competitive classification for wage. It was at that point when our in-house village attorney announced their resignation, and then we went back to the drawing board and had conversations with our contracted attorney. And at that time, we're like, well, I don't know if we necessarily need a paralegal on staff. I think at that time they were recognizing that a paralegal was going to do more of like research work for the attorney. And that's probably true. I don't know that our paralegal would do a lot of legal research per se, in preparation of something, a case being presented to the Court of Appeals or something. But what we have recognized is that on the enforcement side, there's a lot of coordination that needs to happen. And with our attorney not being present on a daily basis in office, Alicia kind of fills that gap to provide that coordination and contact with individuals going through the prosecution and enforcement of municipal citations. So long answer to a short question, yes, I think we're confident that this matches competitively with that wage.
Okay.
I'll make the motion to recommend approval of the creation and classification of the paralegal administrative assistant, or analyst, position.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and second to accept the revised position for paralegal administrative analyst. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, motion carries. C, consider, discuss, act, and propose changes to the Village of Ashwaubenon organizational and functional structure. Joel.
All right, thank you, Chris. As required under municipal code, I have to put together a plan of administration annually for the village to consider, and that includes an organization chart that defines authority and responsibility. I typically try to present this mid-year, around July, August time. And the intent or purpose of that is to kind of introduce concepts or discussions related to positions and whether or not additional positions are going to be requested as part of the next year's budget. so that you're aware of them, so that when we get into October and November and begin discussing next year's fiscal budget, you'll know what was basically proposed by department heads as a part of this org chart. Whether or not those positions are going to be funded, that's going to be predicated on how well the budget process goes and whether or not the village board ultimately determines that priority. So any positions that are being incorporated into the proposed org chart are just kind of being identified structurally within the organization. It does not guarantee that those positions will be funded as part of next year's fiscal year budget. They're just simply being identified because after talking and conversing with the department heads, these are likely the requests that would come in and how that would lay out within the organization chart. With that, this committee makes a recommendation to the board on the org chart. The final organization chart does not get approved by the board until the budget is adopted in November. So this is just a working document. We want to make sure that committee is comfortable with this recommendation, and then ultimately the board will see the recommendation for structure, and then through this committee and village board, you're ultimately going to determine what that funding is for those positions. Just want to touch on a few of the changes within the org chart itself, just to kind of highlight some key areas. I want to note that, based on the conversation and action from committee tonight, we've made the structural changes for the paralegal administrative analyst to be reflective in this proposed org chart. You'll see about half the time of that position will be assigned under village manager. The other half will be dedicated and focused to the village attorney's office. The village clerk's office is still obviously there. What I want to note in that change, the village clerk's office had previously had the positions of village clerk. That was one full-time position. They had a deputy clerk 2 and a deputy clerk 1. Both of those positions were both full-time prior to, both of those positions were full-time leading into this fiscal year. With the hiring of our new clerk, we've identified that there isn't a need for 2 full-time deputy clerks within that office. And so we're reducing the deputy clerk 1 position to a half-time position. That doesn't mean that we are eliminating anyone from full-time to part-time status. That position has been kept vacant from the start of the year because our former deputy clerk 2 resigned effective December 31st, 2025. Our then deputy clerk 1 was promoted into deputy clerk 2, and we've held open the deputy clerk 1 position through this week basically, and we're in the process of recruiting a part-time deputy clerk 1 position to fill that part-time position. So we already know a full-time position budgeted wise is going to go down to a half-time position. I'm going to kind of work from right to left on the bottom of the departments from public safety so I can spend some focus and attention on finance and administrative services. On the public safety side, it's not indicated on this particular chart, but became aware today that public safety will be looking at including another fire inspector within the fire inspection division. What that signifies is that right now we have a full-time fire marshal, and then we have contracted services to provide the balance of inspection services within the fire inspection division. They would essentially eliminate, if it's approved, of course, eliminate the contracted services and then enter into an employment arrangement with an in-house inspector to provide a greater degree of flexibility and direct administration of fire inspection services. So again, there would be a cost reduction in contracted services on the public safety side, but an increase in wages. We don't know to this point whether or not that's balanced or if there's going to be an increase in cost. Again, we'll identify that as part of the budget process. Under the public works side, I'll note that we've made changes to the public works superintendent position. That's outlined. Those changes were approved by both committee and village board this summer, and we're actively recruiting for that public works superintendent position. But we will look to add that facility maintenance manager position. I think we talked about that at this committee level or even at village board level about adding that additional position. Public Works will be looking at trying to incorporate that into their budget this year. From a community development standpoint, there are no changes being proposed within community development. Within Parks, Recreation, and Forestry, Rex is going to be looking to submit a proposal for an additional arborist within the Forestry Division. At present, we have one full-time forester and no other trained arborist on staff. So we pull individuals from Parks to support the forestry operations. And then oftentimes what happens, especially during the winter, we pull laborers from the street side and Public Works to help with forestry as well. By creating the arborist position, the thought process is we're gonna have a more dedicated, professionally trained and certified individual to support our forester in direct tree care within the field. And then also allows us an opportunity to grow and develop a person within that position so that if our forester is gone on a vacation or on medical leave or ultimately retires at some point from service, there's an individual that we can hopefully develop to take that position. Interestingly, our forester spends a great deal of time supporting residents on their tree care related issues. So an individual might have a tree that looks sick or ill or diseased or dying in their yard, and they'll call the village forester. And our village forester will take the time to go out, look at the tree, and provide some professional guidance on that. Many times it's a street tree that is being called in, but sometimes it's a yard tree. And so we try to balance that service with just operational needs, because ultimately those trees are not our responsibility from a public standpoint, but to provide a good service, we do that. When our forester is out of the office for a week, calls compound themselves over that week's time, and then when our forester returns, they spend a week catching up on all the constituent phone calls on the issues that relate to the tree. Having the arborist is there then in the event our forester is gone and can do the same work. So we don't lose continuity and we can kind of continue to build from that. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about financial and administrative services. There aren't any positions with the exception of a grant writer being proposed for this department, but really what we're looking to do is make some structural changes and recognize some of the opportunities for leadership and development within that division. So I'll touch briefly on the grant writer. This was a concept that came up at Village's strategic planning efforts. There was a lot of conversation from the village board about the possibility of hiring a grant writer. That grant writer, if they're successful, obviously generates significant revenues to support a variety of projects in the village, and at the end of the day should ultimately pay for themselves in the savings that would have otherwise not been received from the earnings of the grants. So again, that kind of falls under finance and administrative services. That grant writer would support all departments within the village. It wouldn't just be financial and administrative services. And as we've talked with our department head staff, it doesn't necessarily abdicate them from the responsibility of supporting grant writing activities, but it's going to support them to make sure that the grants are written well, written professionally, written objectively so that we have a better opportunity to acquire them. This individual can also support the solicitation of grants. Oftentimes, our department heads are so overwhelmed with day-to-day operations, it's hard for them to spend some time going through and doing a lot of grant research and figuring out what we're eligible for and then preparing for that application. This person would be dedicated to that end of operations. And then in addition to that, the grant writer, again, we haven't worked through the official job description yet, but can support different things like foundation support, so going and seeking grants through foundations to support projects like park development, playgrounds, things of that nature, or the possibility of fundraising for other key elements. We've talked a lot about opportunities that may be available to us for fundraising for things like new playgrounds or new recreational facilities, things of that nature. This person could potentially support that effort. Beyond the grant writer, we want to kind of split the finance and administrative services department into kind of functional areas. Right now, they're kind of combined into one department. And our goal is to take kind of Greg's position and elevate it to be more of that bigger picture individual that's really going to be focused on budget and capital improvement plan administration, fund management, investment administration, treasury management, kind of that bigger picture. So Greg's not necessarily being always the backup to payroll and the backup to AP and AR, that, we're really kind of focused on that bigger picture. Our goal is to have that position really kind of develop and manage programs where we can find efficiencies and continuous improvement. The goal is to refine our purchasing program so that we find efficiencies in how we bid projects or purchase equipment and apparatus and find efficiencies that way. Lead efforts, if you're familiar with continuous improvement or lean for government, finding ways to be more efficient with the resources we have, and kind of leading those efforts across departmental teams. What that ultimately does is take the staff that are currently in finance and accounting and puts them more into the operations side of finance and accounting. So from payroll to accounts payables, receivables, bookkeeping, general ledger, they're going to be really focused on that, and that's going to remove Greg to kind of focus on those bigger picture elements. Information services is currently under finance, and that's pretty typical unless you get into very big, more robust local government organizations. Finance and IT tend to work together quite well. And so we're going to highlight information services. That's a division within the organization that touches every single department. From the equipping of squad cars to putting a patch, a security patch on my PC this afternoon. They're touching every department and finding ways to utilize technology and information services to add efficiencies to our organization. And then finally, our village assessor has always just kind of been this like hanging chad, if you will, of it's just out there. It's a contracted service. Really kind of want to bring it under coordination of a person or department. So really trying to bring the assessor into finance, because that's really what we're talking about here is assessment services, things of that nature. So ultimately that would have kind of a direct reporting relationship to the Director of Finance and Administrative Services. So again, absent of the grant writer, there aren't any other additions or modifications to Finance and Administrative Services outside of making some structural changes to the Finance Director's position and then the Assistant Finance Director's position to align with their operational expectations. So again, all told, I think based on the staff memo, I've identified 3 positions. I would add a 4th. That fire inspector position was not incorporated in the staff report because that came after the report was submitted for inclusion in the packet. And again, as I indicated in the introduction, none of these positions are funded. This is a concept for review and consideration and recommendation from committee. It will give us the direction as staff as to how we want to build the budget. The budget process ultimately could remove any of these positions or other positions within the organization. It's just simply to identify where departments are leaning towards as they prepare their budgets. So when you get a draft budget for review and deliberation, okay, this was presented, but now it's been removed and or prioritized over something else. So with that, I will answer any questions that you have.
Has there been any thought or work yet on how, I'll call it advancements or implementation of artificial intelligence improves the efficiency of the workforce? So you potentially wouldn't need the incremental, you can expand the role of current employees,
Sure.
So you might not need to add more?
Nothing formally, that's a great question. Nothing formally yet. I know that there have been a number of individuals, myself included, that have either gone to conferences, sessions, or other trainings to learn more about AI and its utilization from both a security standpoint, a records retention standpoint, the utilization of AI for efficiency purposes from things like being kind of like a front desk, if you will, so like a reception, an artificial reception service, both for phone, internet, things of that nature. So nothing formal yet. It's on the cusp of our thought process. I know our IT folks have been talking about it and have gone to trainings and are trying to understand how can we incorporate the utilization of AI to best support the operations. I do know that there are a number of people that utilize it for a variety of purposes, like proofreading documents or, kind of preparing and doing some initial research. But with that, obviously, a lot of review has to occur to ensure that that research is accurate.
Okay, thank you.
How will a grant writer be utilized in a sense of like what they will be working towards, prioritizing their time, I guess?
Yeah, so what I would anticipate this individual doing is first and foremost, a lot of research on grant availability and applicability to our operations.
Okay.
So getting a good understanding of what department needs are and where funding gaps may be present in relation to those needs, and then going out and seeking the grants that may be available. But, so they would have to have an understanding of what the operational needs are of the department. So on the front end, there's gonna be a lot of opportunity there for that individual to get a firm understanding of the operations. As I mentioned, though, departments are still gonna be responsible to say, oh, there's a TAP grant, there's a Transportation Alternatives Program grant in Public Works. That director's like, there's a TAP grant, hey, can you pull up the record or when the application cycle is, look that up, put it on your schedule, coordinate with me to make sure that I am on top of things. So kind of being that liaison on grant preparation. In addition to that, with their expertise, they may be able to look, our engineers are great from a technical standpoint, but maybe they're not as well versed as to explaining the need or justifying the need or the value that grant will provide to the community. And so that grant writer should hopefully enhance what is largely a very technical written justification or description to make it more apt to earning or winning the award. So there'll be definitely some of that opportunity as well. And as I mentioned, they'll be spending some time understanding foundational programs. So these aren't your traditional government issued grants. Oftentimes, if we get grants, at least outside of public safety, they're usually some type of state or federal grant. And so we don't take a huge advantage of foundations and other private sector grants that may be available for public sector. So are there opportunities that they could explore that way? And then I mentioned like the fundraising thing too.
Yeah.
We've had some conversations about, I'll use this somewhat jokingly, of, boy, it's really expensive to buy a garbage truck nowadays. Few $100,000. They're large white boxes on wheels. Is there an opportunity to sell advertisements on your garbage truck?
Yeah.
And could this person sell advertisements on the garbage trucks? Bad example, good example, I don't know what that is, but that would be something that they could do. Or maybe there's a large playground that has to be replaced and the playgrounds are very expensive. Say there's $200,000 a playground. That's pretty difficult for our department heads to lead fundraising efforts for that, but maybe this grant writer could be employed to support kind of fundraising for large scale improvements in the community.
I think it's a great idea. Very good, thank you.
I think the grant writer is a great idea. I think potentially there's a lot of money out there that can be had by the village for various projects that would, it's a skill set. And if they've got the skill set, it'll be wonderful. So with that, I'll make a motion to recommend the amended 2027 Village of Ashwaubenon organizational and functional structure as requested by the village manager.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and second to accept the proposed changes to the organizational and functional structure. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, motion carries. Excuse me. Items for next agenda.
We will likely have another meeting in August. It's that time of year as we're ramping up for budget season. Typically in August, we start talking about wage compensation information, so that likely comes in August because we have our July Bureau of Labor Statistics information, so we'll have that conversation. I don't know that we're gonna necessarily be prepped yet for health insurance, but we might have some initial numbers. We'll have maybe equalized values, and it's kind of those, we'll start talking kind of big picture parameters for budget season. So again, I would anticipate an August meeting.
Okay. Anything else? Joel and the staff, thanks for all the work you guys have done and all the proposals here and everything. I know it's that time of year to tighten everything up and before we get the heavy hitting on the budget, but, it's nice work and appreciate it.
Greg and his staff are doing a great job, and they're double dipping right now because we call them Tyler Talks. They're in the process of updating our entire software, our enterprise software package. So every day their door is closed and they're learning all about Tyler. And then in addition to that, they have to do all of the other normal day-to-day business. So yeah, you guys you're going to be busy.
All right. That's it. I'll take a motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We're adjourned.